The Great Depression was a worldwide experience of economic downturn that is often attributed to the 1929 stock market crash. However, this era, the interwar period from 1918 to 1939, was filled with social and economic uncertainty and unrest for many Canadians. Economic challenges and struggles already had strong foundations well before the infamous Black Tuesday Wall Street crash. After the turmoil of the First World War, many Canadian soldiers returned home, having experienced the horrors of trench warfare. However, some of these soldiers also felt resentment towards the established economic system. They believed that war profiteers and arms companies had largely benefited from the fighting. This resentment, paired with decreasing real wages, set the stage for social and economic unrest. In the prairies, challenges began early. Virtually all southeastern Alberta and southwestern Saskatchewan were experiencing a brutal drought from 1917 to 1926. The prelude to the Dust Bowl that would later strike in the 1930s, the Canadian prairie dryland disaster caused a population loss of 21% for affected areas in Alberta between 1921 and 1926. This is not to say that all was bad. The 1920s had its challenges, but it was also a time of great technological progress. Things like the radio, the automobile, and much more were rolling off the assembly lines and into people's homes, particularly in urban developed areas. The Winnipeg General Strike of 1919 is often considered the critical point in leftist and unionist movements in Canada. Today, the Winnipeg General Strike is typically seen as an attempt by working class people, many of whom were soldiers who had recently returned from Europe, to attain better wages and better working conditions. About 15 years later, in 1935, conditions had arguably worsened due to the Great Depression. Another labor movement gained momentum. This would be the On to Ottawa trek, where around 1,000 strikers boarded freight trains heading to Ottawa to voice their complaints about poor living conditions and disorganized relief programs. In the eyes of the government and the police, the Winnipeg General Strike signified the rising dangers of leftist ideologies like communism and socialism. The 1920s and the 1930s would be marked by the establishment of many leftist political parties and populist movements, such as the Communist Party of Canada, the Cooperative Commonwealth Federation, and the Social Credit Movement, which was particularly popular in Western Canada. Many of these political entities would be put under RCMP surveillance and often had to operate behind closed doors, as their very existence was illegal. R.B. Bennett, leader of the Conservative Party, would become Prime Minister of Canada in 1930. He would take charge of the country during the most intense moments of the Depression. His government enacted policy that would provide welfare through relief programs, even going as far to mimic some of American President Roosevelt's New Deal programs. Nonetheless, Bennett would lose to the Liberals' Mackenzie King in the 1935 federal election. Although King and the Liberals won the election, the biggest winner may have been a third party, the Cooperative Commonwealth Federation. They had been able to gather support primarily from working class peoples and will eventually become the New Democratic Party in 1961. The interwar period would be marked by economic strife and social unrest. Highlighted by the Great Depression, historians and economists today continue to study the period in hopes of identifying its cause so such an economic disaster might never happen again. Regardless, the political and economic actions and ideologies that were popular during the boom and bust era continue to influence politics and policy today.